Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. I didn't mention architecture, actually. Bent in my bed phoned last night. He said, "What's the name of your presentation?" I said, "I can't remember." So that's because we've been enjoying ourselves in that other city. I won't mention the name for the past few days. But now we're in Turku, so everything's good again. So I've called it Artists, the Arts and Place. I've also called it a personal journey. I'm kind of at the end of that particular part of my career. And so I hope I'm going to share with you some of the things I've learned. I'm not trained in visual art. I'm not trained in architecture. I have a degree in English literature, which led me to a career in the visual arts, including photography and public art. And then I got to know a lot of architects, as I'll tell you about. So I'm a kind of interested man in the street who stumbled into all of these areas in which you are experts. And I've enjoyed my career hugely. And I hope from that perspective, that's why I call it a personal journey, that I can share something with you that is useful to you in thinking about the future of this extraordinary place that we're in. And the most important theme of my talk is place. So I'm going to tackle that from different perspectives. I'm going to cover quite a bit of territory quite quickly. But I know from you introducing yourself that you will be up for the task of that in English. So here we are on a total artwork. My main theme isn't architecture or art, although they're both important. It's place and placemaking. How we design, build, and vitalize our towns, cities, and neighborhoods. Because after my career, this is where I ended up, understanding that it was place as a holistic idea that we all had to work together on from our different perspectives. So the questions I'm going to ask myself are: what is the role of the artist in making a good place? What is a good place? How do artists help make it good? And what does that mean for us as professionals and as citizens? And finally, I'll come back to the place where we're all sitting and ask, what does it mean perhaps for this particular special place? So I'm going to speak from a personal perspective. Then in section 2, I'm going to try to define some of the terms that I'm using: placemaking, artists, the arts, what the role of architecture is. Then I'm going to focus on what artists do in placemaking. And then I'm going to ask the question how we can nurture, how we can encourage good placemaking. And finally, I make the case, or suggest the case, for special places like this that we're in. The arts, place, and me, it says. So, place is important. And here we are, next to a wonderful river, the Aura River. You have a castle in the town, and as important as the castle is the tomten that lives in the castle. So you have a castle with a tomten. Yeah. You know what Jan-Erik is like. For him, the tomten is more important than the castle because it's about a story and it's about the past. This is maybe the third time I've been to Turku. So I'm also from a place with a river. This is the Ottawa River. I swam in a lot as a child. The river is very important to me as the place I'm from. We don't have a castle. We have a sort of parliament buildings on the hill. And instead of a tomten, we have a prime minister. But he's called Trudeau. So, it's quite interesting prime minister. The second Trudeau, so you have a young Trudeau and you have the ghost of his father in the parliament buildings at the moment. And the other thing that interested me is this, because it's a lumber town, just like this one. And you see the picture of Turku here, the historic picture with the lumber yards and how important that was. So I thought this is an extraordinary coincidence that I'm in a place which shares many, many aspects. I came to the UK as a young man to widen my horizons, to be British, and also to be European. I thought. It's not quite working out at the moment, the European bit, but in Turku I feel European as well as British. My professions, I started off writing poetry and fiction as a young man. I lived in this cottage for a while next to a little river in England, and there's my notebook and my computer. Then I spread out into journalism, writing about the arts and society. Then, as Ben mentioned, I became eventually director of a photography gallery. Here you see me stumbling from one expertise into another. Then we decided to go back to Canada for a while, Diane and I worked for the Canada Council Art Bank. I was talking this morning with one of you about that. Now, it's a contemporary art collection purchased by artists, juries of artists who change all the time, and quite a contemporary collection, quite a challenging one, not pretty pictures. And my job was to get this contemporary art into government buildings all across Canada. So having spent 20 years in Britain, I was back in my own country, traveling across, and discovering it for the first time. Then we came back to England, and then I became an expert in public arts, or had to very, very, very quickly understand, well, what happens when artists work in public places? And when I arrived in 1997, the company's logo was Public Arts, putting art in public places. So you have the art already, and you put it in a public place. Yeah. Plop art. But what happened in England at that time was Lord Rogers did his report about urbanism and urban design, the Urban Task Force report, and I thought this is an interesting place. This is the thing that the artists would need to understand, is how places come to be. They need to understand how architects work, how clients work, how local authorities make decisions, and I found that hugely interesting. So I took the company in that direction. It's a small company based in Wakefield, near Leeds, so it's quite a small town, and later on I'll talk about the problems that came from that, as well as the good things. But urbanism was about how to make good places. Now I'm back to writing poetry and fiction. What that means is every few years, every 3 or 4 years, 5 years in this case, you make a little book like this, and then you put it on a bookshelf and it disappears, right? Because it's very, very big. This is what being a poet is like. So it's not placemaking. It's an internal thing that is about creativity. And the most important aspect of this house, I think, is the creativity that's embedded in it. In my career, 2 consistent themes: the relationship between the arts and society. Can we move art and artists from the edges of society? Most societies now in the West, art is at the margins. Can we move it to the center? Can we make it more important, more central to people's lives? And the other thing is about education and learning. How can we grow understanding and participation in the arts, but also in making good places? So I'm going to try and define now some of these terms that I'm throwing around, hoping some of them will be useful to you. So a place is obviously a physical thing, a street, a neighborhood, a town. But the sense in which I'm using it is that it's a physical place, but also it's a social place and a psychological place. So how we feel in our street, in our neighborhood, or a town, that also is part of place, in my definition that I'm using today. So place is designed by professionals, some of whom we have here, an architect, we have planners and so on. Planner, architect, urbanist, engineer design the physical place and make the physical place. But the place I'm talking about is also about people, citizenship, communities, responsibilities. The idea of the civic. And therefore, since it's an idea of the civic, it's about awareness. And if it's about awareness, then it must be about education. So learning, together with creativity, the atmosphere of learning and the importance of learning is the other key theme for me. And if it's about awareness and education, then place is also about participation, and it's about democracy. So important to us in our age and in our time at the moment. So if we ask what is a good place, I mean, all of us probably have a sense of that. It's a place where there's some kind of balance and harmony. It's a place where there's a sense of well-being. And I'll talk a little bit about that term. There's a sense of well-being, which is a physical thing, but also cultural, and also economic, and also environmental. And soon I'll have a drawing that pulls all these things together in an easy way, you'll see. So, to me, place is not the individual buildings, but the collective combination of buildings, streets, spaces, but also what happens in them and how we feel about them. And the other thing I'd like to say is the importance of the everyday and the ordinary. So not just the individual buildings or the great buildings or the wonderful places, but actually what does an ordinary pavement or sidewalk or little park in a city feel like? And I'll come back to the ordinary and everyday because it came on quite strongly later. So what is good placemaking then? It is, to me, place understood holistically. And it's very exciting to be in a room where actually we have a very holistic set of expertise and backgrounds and interests in this room today. So it's not design, economy, environment, or culture, but all of these together. So I'll just pause for a moment on the idea of well-being. This is not Marcel Duchamp. Okay? This is a wash basin in the Design Museum in that other city that I won't mention the name of, but which we were visiting the past few days. And in the Design Museum, there's a history of the last 100 years of Finnish design. And I was drawn to this. It's a 1930s design for a wash basin in a mental institution, which I'll try and find for you, to be specific.
I guess it's Paivio Sanatorium.
Yeah, that's it. Is it in that other city that we're not mentioning? Okay, yeah, you're right. It's a pineotuberculosis sanatorium in the 1930s. And this interested me because it was a new hand basin which improved hygiene and therefore improved physical health. But the little caption also said that it created a sense of well-being. So this connection between design and well-being, and it's an idea of well-being that's not just about physical health. It's well-being in that broader sense. So you notice this lovely circle of the wash basin, and here's my wonderful circle drawing. So there's the good place, is the biggest circle. And what joins everything is a sense of well-being in the place. And it's a Venn diagram joining culture, environment, economy, governance, health. And at the center of it is the citizen. So this is my theory. This is the theory I've come to. And over the years, there were 3 circles, sometimes 2. Now this is the best that I've come up with. And I'm just trying to explain to you what I mean by good place and well-being. So if that is a good place, if that's the good place, then who makes a place that's good for us and our children to live in, and for future generations to live in? So we have the design professionals, many in the room today, who are important. Health professionals, we need business people, we need good government, and we need artists and cultural professionals. And all of them do this, but by engaging with citizens. And citizens need to engage with all of those professionals too, in this circle place that I will come back to. So here's a slightly different version of the circle. Here's a successful place. And here we have artists, design professionals, educators. Very, very important, I think, to have that. And then public-private sector, mashed into one, which very, very seldom happens. And again at the center, citizens, ordinary people. So what about architects? Because we're sitting in an extraordinary architectural product here, and I thought there might be some architects in the room. And my experience with architects is that sometimes architects feel that architecture is the most important art form or most important thing. But what I've learned is actually that architecture plays its part, but only as part of the whole thing. So the cult of the iconic building can sometimes be a dangerous thing that distracts from the broader place. Which is not to say that I do not love extraordinary, iconic buildings. I've done some work with Will Alsop and Terry Farrell and other really great architects in England, and I admire their work. But the risk is that if we look at individual buildings, we lose the sense of place. Towards 2013, I was very lucky to be invited to be part of Sir Terry Farrell's review of architecture in England. A nationwide study, the first since the Rogers Report in the late 90s, because the British government had stopped showing interest in this. Well, Terry, of course, is a great architect who's done some great things. But I wanted to share with you his view and the view we came to about where architecture sits in this idea of place. And I was very lucky because, like sitting here today with you, I met and worked with some really great people from a range of professions. Because from the beginning, Terry took the attitude that it wasn't just about architecture, it needed to be about place. So the report came out in 2014, and it's typified by a new understanding of what he called place-based planning and design. A new level of connection between government institutions, agencies, and the public, and the professions. A new level of public engagement. He's calling for this in a report. I'm not saying it's real or happening every day, but this is the theory we came to in the report. A new engagement with the public through setting up special places called the city room in every town, in every city. A sustainable and low-carbon future, and a commitment to making the ordinary better. So that I come back to that idea of the importance of the ordinary, not just the extraordinary, but the ordinary in the built environment. So in terms of architecture then, what we need, I think, is a holistic definition to understand that the incredible and important skills of architects are part of a palette that makes place. And that architecture on its own, just like engineering on its own or art on its own, won't make a good place. It's about this combination, I think. So I decided to focus on what artists can do, because we're in this extraordinary house and you're all interested in the role that artists can play. And I'm focusing on it because there are health professionals and architects and everyone else who makes good plays. But I think that with artists, the role that artists can play is not appreciated. It's not fully understood, even by artists. But in our society, artists are at the edge, and their work, I think, is not fully appreciated. So I'm focusing on that. So here again, we have the wash bowl with everyone in it, making a successful place. Now, artists have design and placemaking skills that they can bring to this. Artists can help to animate public space and create a sense of place through permanent or temporary art and performance and street arts. They can engage citizens in debating and conceiving and planning and designing and thinking about their places because they have skills of communication. Not every artist, but many artists can do that. And in England this happens quite successfully a lot. So following the Powell review as director of Beam, we felt that the role of artists still, although some strong statements were made, the role of artists had still been underplayed, and we should spend some time focusing on that, for fear that the creativity and imagination that artists can bring to placemaking will kind of sink down low under all the other professionals and things. And the point of it, so we started to create, we gathered people together around the country and we created what we call a manifesto, not for public art, but for the public arts. So again, to me, the important thing I want to stress is that our definition of artists working in placemaking included writers, street arts, theater, digital arts, light, artists working in light, procession, parade, festival, fete, acrobats, anything that can happen in the public domain that is creative and done by professional artists is the definition to us of public arts. So we were talking earlier that this is the age of crossover between disciplines. We are following slowly in artist practice. Artist practice is very much drawing from everywhere, I think, now, rather than from special fields. So likewise, when it comes to placemaking, I think anything that artists can do in placemaking needs to be valued. So if we talk about public art, we talk about the visual arts, and we talk about artists as makers, often as sculptors. But artists in placemaking can be visual arts and other arts, performers in writing, artists as interpreters of place, something that artists are extremely good at sometimes, the genius loci of the place. But also what tends to be underplayed is artists contributing as thinkers, generating ideas about place, and artists as facilitators of citizen participation, which I've already mentioned. Now most of this you perhaps already know. I just illustrate some examples of artists creating symbols of place. Sometimes very well and sometimes very poorly. But it's something they can do, is pull together the aspects of a place and represent them. So a very famous example is Anthony Gormley's Angel of the North. But there are other smaller examples around the country also, where an artist has made perhaps a sculpture, but also redesigned a whole square. This is a former railway station, the original railway station in York, where I live now. And one of the jobs we did in 2014 was to create public art for this railway station. And what the art did was to bring back the memory of the station because it was going to be now the town council offices. So people come there to pay their parking fines and all of that stuff. But the role of the art was to draw on the memory of the place.
Right.
Artists can play an important part in education of young people and also older people. Artists can facilitate community celebration. They can create something surprising, delightful, and memorable, just an experience in place, such as this surprising temporary transformation by Richard Woods in Oxford. Extraordinary things artists can make, and when we come upon their work, we feel delight, we feel wonder, we feel we've encountered something extraordinary. Now, the other thing is that artists can do all of that, but also become a tool for planning, places by creating temporary works, in this case by closing off traffic. Normally this street is full of traffic. This was a project by Trudy Entwistle, who designed the seats, the red seats you'll see around the house, and is a friend of Jan-Erik's. So we did two big projects involving grass and sculpture and closing roads, so that the city could understand, in terms of planning for the future, what the effect of closing the road might be. And also, you create a temporary celebration where suddenly anything can happen in a place that's full of cars. And you have this celebration, you have this creativity, and you also have underneath it the planning system trying to think about the future of the place. And you can consult people about what's important to them in the future. We want your comments. And you can consult older people and you can consult younger people. What kind of place would you like this to be? Because without citizen participation, you will not have good places. So then I was thinking about this symposium today and my experience, and thinking of two things we've done over the years that I thought might be helpful for you in thinking about this place. One of the most successful moments of my career was the creation of a summer school, which brought together people from different backgrounds for an intense three-day period. And so we did this, we did 6 of these. And it seemed to me the summer school, rather like Bent bringing his students here, create this intensity, this intense place for thinking and rethinking. And I thought you might be interested to know about that, because I think that could be of use in thinking about the house here. So here again is the mix of people we need. So this is a drawing of the orangery where the company Beam was based. And we had this 18th century building, and we had a garden, and we also had graveyard here. So this was a building that existed for 200 years with a very complex, layered history. This is where the summer school happened. It's in the middle of a town. The railway station is right next door. Okay? So the first thing we did was bring together people from different backgrounds, mainly with an interest in creativity and place, I would say, but architect, counselor, artists, planners, and it would be facilitated by experts. So you might have one architect, one artist, and someone from another profession who are facilitating the 3 days. And I won't go into detail. I want to look at just the ingredients that made it so very exciting, so very inspiring for us. So these are the experts then. The artist David Mack, the architect Will Alsop, and Phil, who was an expert on community work, talking to us about their experience. And then you get people playing. This is very important. You all look very sober at the moment, and very serious. And actually my experience is you have to break this down a little bit. So you have to have some serious fun. You get people doing meaningfully, silly things, making together, working together, and so on. Yeah, so here's Will Alsop leading his team, making a cardboard hotel hung in a tree. It sounds crazy, but it works. And of course, food is important. One of the things Jan-Erik Andersson keeps telling me and showing me. Food is very, very important. And food encouraging debate. Okay? So you break down the walls between people by doing slightly silly things for a while, and then you give people tasks to do where they have to make things or sing or do something a little bit out of the ordinary, and then you give people good food and good talk. And also, this is about taking people out. So even though they're in an extraordinary place, we take people out for a tour of a sculpture park or a new part of the town or something like that. So it's important to be there in an intense place, but also to understand that place is connected with other places. So, in a few images and a few words, I've tried to just explain what the summer school was about. And what made it work. Participants from a range of disciplines, facilitators from a range of disciplines, expert speakers coming in and, almost seeding or nurturing with some ideas, hard work, serious fun, visits to other places, and creative tasks outside the box, and good food. What makes it work is that everyone shares the idea we want to make our place better. Our town, our neighborhood, our city. We want to make it better. Learning is built into the DNA of the summer school. We learn from each other. Everything we do has to have learning. The notion that to make good places, it needs to be through collaboration. We cannot do it on our own. A commitment, once people are there for the 3 days, they have to stay. Okay? No dropping in or out. Creativity is very, very important. You have to challenge and loosen boundaries and connect strangers. And you make connections to wider context and realities. So economy, community, socialism. So it's not just a fun time for creative people or artists to have fun together. They need to be thinking, what connects my expertise with the needs of the place? Economy, health, well-being, business. And then what happens after the summer school is also important. The link to decision makers, how you communicate the ideas you've come up with in the summer school, and how, this is very important, how you link to education and universities. Because universities are continually teaching the citizens of the future. To embed the learning. So having talked about the wide place, and even said that individual buildings can be distracting, I believe there is a role nevertheless for the special place. The special house, the special garden, the unique. So I began to think about comparisons between the Orangery, which I was director of for 17 or 18 years, and this place. And in some ways they're very different, of course. But let's look at the Orangery and what made it special. Of course, the Orangery had memory. It had layers of history, which is not present in Leaf House. It had graves in the garden. As far as I know, Jan-Erik hasn't buried anybody in the garden yet. Although I understand it's been threatened that he would be buried sometimes in the garden. So this is a historical place, but I think the important thing is not so much the history, but the narrative, the storytelling. Maybe it's the storytelling that's important. So this worked very well. I inherited this place and we created a vision for it, which was called People Making Places. And we commissioned the artist David Mack to make this collage. To almost, there's an artist's skill in almost creating visually what our vision for the place was. It was a place where all kinds of people would come together to work together and play together and learn together. But also in the background, you've got all of England or all of Yorkshire very close to the place. So it was a special place for uniting different places all around and creating that intensity. And then it was also about mixing people, bringing people from different professions together. And I didn't, I only have a few minutes to speak to you, so I didn't want to talk about all the things that we've done. I simply wanted to say that when people came to the Orangery, once they were there and found it, it was quite difficult to find. Once they were there, they relaxed, and they also became very, very creative. And they felt close to each other, and something about the place caused people to loosen and to think in a different way, to begin to think in a different way. In our case, about placemaking. In your case, it might be about the joining of science and the arts. But science and the arts are no good if the place, is not full of well-being also. So we commissioned artists, we did extraordinary things, we brought people together and created that sense of togetherness, of serious collaborative thinking about the future. So then I began to think, well, what are the qualities of a special place? Presuming that we're sitting in one and we might want to. Well, first of all, there's beauty and delight in the place. It has to be wonderful, I think. I spoke about the sense of history, but I think it doesn't always have to be about history, but it has to be a place that has a sense of meaning or significance, as a story, a powerful story. And it seemed to me the Leaf House has this powerful story to it, where something extraordinary has happened and a sense that it can happen again. This place is amazing. We can do amazing things together. That sense, I think, is important. Trees and nature seems to help in my experience. It's a place that is separate and special, but not isolated from realities. And if it is isolated, then you have to, in your program, you have to bring those realities into the place by bringing in experts or film or something that talks about the serious issues that are about making good places and creating well-being. So it needs this balance of separation, but also connectivity. It needs to be a convivial space. Convivial is like the spirit in this room this morning when you were all gathered and we had coffee and we were chatting. Convivial, you're in a friendly space. It needs to be safe, but it needs to be safe to be challenged in. So not safe in the sense, I can relax here and I don't have to think. It's a place where you can challenge people. And so I think this place that we're sitting in now, in this city, next to this river, with its history, with its castle, with its tomten, with its mix of experience, has the components, or some of the ingredients, because it's moved from a design through to the reality that we're sitting in now. So what is the opportunity here and what is needed? I just share with you a few thoughts that might help us in the rest of the day. It seems to me you need to have a vision and an ethos, and they aren't quite the same thing. There's an ethics behind the vision. You definitely need collaboration. One needs leadership, but it needs to be a leadership that's not necessarily a dictatorial leadership. It's a leadership that is based on collaboration. That's a tricky leadership, but that's a very important thing. Of course, you need resources, and these are financial resources, but also other kinds of resources too. But financial is important, and you need the right mix of partners, of people around the table. No, I'm not quite ready for that yet. Not quite ready to say thank you. Because last night I woke up because it doesn't get dark in Finland. So I kept waking up. And of course, I mean, at the Orangery, we did create something extraordinary. I mean, it was successful. It worked, it brought people together. The summer school was fantastic, and we did amazing things in the garden. But it didn't last. It didn't last. The company now has left the Orangery and moved on. And so I felt it was important to be honest with you, because it's important to understand why something doesn't work fully, so that you see the mistakes. So I was thinking about what the weaknesses were in our case. This is not to depress you, but simply to say, well, this can be fixed. I inherited a company which had funding from the Arts Council mainly and the local council, but the funding was for the company's work outside the Orangery, in the public space. So you need to have, wherever your funding comes from, it needs to be fit for purpose. So if the purpose is building-based, then the resource needs to reflect that. So I then had to struggle over the years to try and get people interested in funding the building. And of course, an old building requires constant attention, as a new building does too. So there was a mismatch in the history of the company. The company was public arts, putting art in public places. But I was interested in making a special place, the orangery itself, making that center. So if this is to be a center for something, make sure that the financial funding matches that purpose. You need a continuous connection with the universities. I established connections on a project basis with this university or that university. 1 year Huddersfield, then Leeds, then Sheffield. But I think in the partnership, the university needs to be involved, or universities. And of course, universities can compete. They can compete with each other. You need to create a common ground, a common interest, so the competition is less and they join up. So a continuous educational connection. I think also communication and media about what you are doing here is very important. And in the case of the Orangery, it was weak. I had a very good team, but we didn't have the resources to communicate about what we were doing. And I don't think this was a problem for us. It's more something for you to watch out for, is that whatever vision or ethos you create for this place, it mustn't be too rigid. It mustn't be too fixed. It needs to have a flexibility, because we cannot look into the future. So in 30 years' time or 50 years' time, we hope that this building may still be being used in an exciting way, but we don't necessarily know exactly what that will be. So the ethos and vision needs to have elasticity in it, be elastic and flexible. And finally, it's being in the right place, at the right time, with the right people. And my sense of the Orangery was it was an extraordinary place, but it was in a small town, not in a big city like Leeds, where more things would have been possible. And in particular, we lacked support from people with influence and power and money in whatever position they were in. So although we created something extraordinary for a time, it wasn't something that necessarily that lasted. And of course that was disappointing. Except that, looking back, I think about the extraordinary things that happened there and how it affected everyone who saw or experienced it. And that, of course, has given me a lot of satisfaction. But also there's a lesson to be learned. There's several lessons there. So vision and ethos, collaboration, leadership, resources, and the right mix of partners, I think, is the secret. Now I'll go back to writing poetry.
Thank you, Robert, for this. This was, in a sense, the ultimate opening of this seminar. And I think I think it's very important that your focus, that it's not about the geometrical space or the phenomenological space, it's about the inhabited space, the people. And that's so it's very strong stress on that. It's about people, and it's about people making places. So I think that's a very good platform for our discussion today. I would love that this presentation would have been on a university, because this is how universities should be.
Yeah.
But in fact they are not.